Manaphy is one of the most mysterious Pokemon in a franchise full of mysteries. Since its debut in 2006, alongside its equally mysterious offspring Phione, theories on its origin and the inspirations for its design have been lacking. Where does its name come from? What makes it the Prince of the Sea? What's up with its unique life cycle not seen in any other Pokemon? And why does it look like that? If you're crazy like me and researched these questions before, the common answer you would find online is that Manaphy is a sea angel, a type of incredibly cute sea slug popular in Japan, and not much else. At the time of recording, this is the only suggestion that Bulbapedia makes for both Manaphy and Fiona's inspiration, and doesn't connect to Manaphy's name at all. I wasn't satisfied with this answer. It doesn't explain, well, any of the 20-year-old questions that surround the duo. So I took a deep dive into the mysteries of Manaphy, and I discovered the real truth. Manaphy is a jellyfish. To be entirely honest, the dive I took wasn't that deep. After trolling through the English-speaking internet, I realized no one could offer any explanation beyond what was already found on Bulbapedia. So using my incredibly rusty Japanese, I began to search the Japanese internet instead, and immediately found what I was looking for. The Pixiv Encyclopedia is a useful website with casually written articles on all sorts of Japanese popular culture, and the entry for Manaphy is long and detailed. And sitting there in the name, origin, and motif section was the answer. The fee of Manaphy is derived from the word ephira. In English, ephira usually refers to a specific stage in a jellyfish life cycle, which is basically the larval form right before the fully grown Medusa form that everyone knows. However, in Japanese, Ephira kudakeka, or the Ephira jellyfish family, is a more specific term for what is known in English as the Norsithoidae family of jellyfish. With this information, I took a closer look at Norsithoids, and there it was. Without a doubt, this is one of the animals that Manaphy's designers took inspiration from. The design of Manaphy's egg is directly inspired by the Medusa form of Norsithoid jellyfish. The central red orb is the gastrovascular cavity, basically the stomach, and the surrounding 8 yellow orbs are the gonads. Yeah, I've always been fascinated by Manaphy's beautiful looking egg, but I didn't realize that I was staring at its gonads on full display for 20 years. So Manaphy's egg might not really be an egg, but rather the larval form of Manaphy itself, looking like the Medusa stage of a Norsithoid jellyfish, though functionally more like the Ephira stage that becomes the fully grown Medusa. This idea that Manaphy's egg is its larval form is further supported by the fact that in the Gen 4 games, Manaphy's egg has a unique hatching animation. Instead of cracking open like a regular egg, it looks more like the egg morphs into Manaphy, similar to the animation for evolutions. Moving on from the egg, Manaphy itself is a little more confusing. The jellyfish resemblance is muddied, as the designers clearly wanted a humanoid shape to match the movie tie-in mythicals of previous generations, Mew, Celebi, and Jirachi. Compared to the egg, the gonads are no longer visible, and the stomach appears to have moved down to the front of the abdomen. This next part is a little speculative, but I think it's reasonable to suggest that the head is intended to resemble the body of a jellyfish in Medusa form. Over the years, the head's shape has been changed slightly from the original design documents, but it was originally more jellyfish-esque. The arms and legs create a silhouette of tentacles hanging from the body, which could explain why the arms are actually longer than the torso. But here's what really convinced me. Some species in the Norsithoidae family, such as Norsithopunctata, have tentacles with slightly bulbous protrusions on the end. Finally, an explanation for why on earth Manaphy, supposedly based on a sea angel, has these strange feelers dangling off its head. They are jellyfish tentacles, though Manaphy uses them for its psychic powers instead of stinging. Speaking of psychic powers, this is presumably where the mana part of Manaphy's name comes in, with most sources suggesting it is simply the word mana or mana, meaning spiritual energy or life force in Oceanian cultures. This is Bulbapedia's suggestion, and one I think is reasonable. Although, I did see that Japanese sources offer some alternative interpretations. The jellyfish connection might also provide an explanation for the Prince of the Sea title, often given to Manaphy throughout the franchise. The Norsithoid family is part of the order Coronitae, otherwise known as crown jellyfish. Yeah, maybe a bit of a stretch, but if Manaphy is a crown jellyfish, maybe that inspired the designers to make it the Prince of the Sea that protects the sea crown in Pokemon Ranger and the Ranger movie. Other interesting parallels with jellyfish are Manaphy's Pokedex entries. Water makes up 80% of its body. That's interesting, because a key characteristic of jellyfish is that they are 95% water. Humans are already 60% water though, so maybe the developers are suggesting that its anatomy is kind of like that of a jellyfish, but not completely. Born on a cold sea floor, it will swim great distances to return to its birthplace. I honestly thought that jellyfish just sort of float around, but it turns out they are capable of migration both horizontally and vertically to seek out ideal conditions such as water temperature. This includes annual migrations based on the season. This sounds a lot like Manaphy, which holds the title of Seafaring Pokemon, or Migration Pokemon if translated more literally from Japanese. Phione has a matching Pokedex entry, which also brings attention to water temperature. It drifts in warm seas. It always returns to where it was born, no matter how far it may have drifted. Phione holds a similar title of Sea Drifter Pokemon. Speaking of Phione, let's give this underappreciated Pokemon some attention. The Phi in Phione is presumably also lifted from Ephira, but the Ione is actually a derivative of Cleone, a type of sea angel. Cleone are very popular in Japan and frequently referenced in video games, probably due to how much cuter they are compared to other sea slugs. If you've noticed, I've avoided saying that Manaphy is not a sea angel. I think it's reasonable to suggest that both Manaphy and Phione are inspired by elements of both jellyfish and sea angels. To add to the confusion, Phione has a flotation sac on its head that allows it to drift in warm waters. This brings to mind the Portuguese man-o'-war jellyfish, which is not actually a true jellyfish, but a siphonophore. Man-o'-war colonies have flotation sacs on top, and are the only marine creature I could find with a flotation sac at the top like this. If you know of any others, please leave a comment. The Man-o'-war's color scheme also matches Phione's quite closely with darker navy elements. So is Phione a combination of jellyfish, siphonophore, and sea angel? I don't know. Compared to Manaphy and Norsithoidae, this is not a particularly solid connection, so let's move on. In the games, Manaphy are able to lay Phione eggs, however they can only do so with a Ditto, not another Manaphy. I think this is also a reference to the life cycle of jellyfish, as jellyfish often reproduce asexually, meaning they do not require a second jellyfish to create offspring. One jellyfish also makes a lot of offspring, which kind of parallels the single Manaphy many Phione concept. Why Phione is a different species and unable to evolve into Manaphy seems to be ultimately unexplained. Jellyfish medusae usually produce eggs which hatch into polyps, which grow into Ephirae and then into new medusae, completing their cycle. So the Pokemon designers were just doing their own weird thing here, taking the weirdness of jellyfish life cycles and making something equally strange. I don't have anything else to say about the final design of Phione. However, it is interesting that in internal files for Battle Revolution on the Wii, many Pokemon have placeholder names, including Phione. Phione is referred to as Edufeet, suggesting its original concept involved Ephira, but not Cleone. Did they bring in the Cleone inspiration after the initial concept? We may never know. Wait a moment, I'm getting a call from renowned video game data miner and good video maker, Slurry Geyser.
Hi Shin, I'm sorry to interrupt your video, but I know the real design inspiration for Phione, so you're going to want to listen to this and put it in your video. Now I know you're proud of your gonad theory, but you seem to have missed the simple fact that Phione's name is an anagram of iPhone. So instead of a jellyfish, this mysterious creature was actually based on Apple's touchscreen device, and when you look at it this way, its weird design starts to make sense. Because Phione has a button on his tummy, which is a reference to the iPhone button. Because most phones at the time had loads of buttons with numbers and stuff on them, but the iPhone did not. Look carefully at Phione's design and you'll see that he has no number buttons either, which is quite interesting, I'm sure you'll agree. And there's more. They both came out in 2007, which simply cannot be a coincidence. You could argue that Phione's first game was Pokemon Ranger in March 2006, long before the iPhone was ever announced in January 2007. But to that I would say, this wouldn't be the first time that Pokemon has predicted the future in clever anagrams that very few are smart enough to pick up on. So that's pretty much it, and you're welcome.
Wow, thanks for the facts, Slurry Geyser. You made my speculation in this video look positively factual. Check out his channel for actually interesting information on Elden Ring. Really, one of my favorite YouTube channels. Now we have potential answers to all of the questions I posed at the beginning of the video. Manaphy and Phione are still weird Pokemon, but just a little bit less mysterious than they were before. Of course, everything in this video is ultimately speculation, unless directly confirmed by Game Freak staff, but I think the Norsathoid Jellyfish connection is pretty watertight. I hope to see this knowledge enter the English-speaking Pokemon community, so everyone knows just a little bit more about one of my favorite Pokemon, Manaphy. And Phione too. If you enjoyed this video, please follow the channel so you can see my next Pokemon video, probably in about 5 years' time.